Welcome to the Storymakers Podcast, a place where curiosity and play meet to spark faith through the imagination. I'm your host, Mel, and I'll introduce you to new friends who will share hope for the kids and teens in your life, with a dose of encouragement for us grown-ups too. Let's get the party started. Hey Storymakers, Mel here. I am super pumped up. We are with Father Jameson, and he is located in Savannah, Georgia at St. John's. Thank you so much for being here, Jonathan. We're so excited to have you.
It's so good to be here, Mel. Good to be with you.
Well, usually here on the pod, we have had moms and we've had some dads, we've had some clergy, spattered clergy, but, and we've had different kinds of artists, but we haven't had any musicians on our pod, and we're super excited to have you. So
there we go.
Don't know who Jonathan is, friends in the Storymaker world, Mockingbird world. Yep. You want to know who Jonathan your story is so incredible. We love stories. And today we're talking about how stories are just upside down sometimes. Yeah. And you can't even imagine what God's wild imagination is, where he's going to land you. So Jonathan, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, clergy stories are always a long story. But let's just start with where are you from and how did you end up in the clergy seat?
Yeah, good question. Like you said, it goes way back. So I was born in San Diego, grew up in Southern California.
Yay, West Coast.
Yeah. My North County. And my parents were sort of new converts to sort of charismatic, non-denominational Christianity. Grew up in sort of the Vineyard movement, which is sort of like California Jesus movement,
I grew up in Calvary Chapel, so
me too. So we went Vineyard, then Calvary Chapel. So there we are.
I was really afraid of I was afraid to be left behind.
Yes,
my whole childhood is marked with "Don't be left behind."
Same thing. I mean, the wonderful part about I think the fact that my parents were recent converts and just sort of the general vibe of that church, at least my experience of it, was just people were real serious, faithful Christians, and that just really stuck with me. And I could tell my parents really believed, and some of the stuff they really believed was a little wacky like that, and so I had to work through that eventually. But they love Jesus, and that stuck. I just always sort of knew God to be real and present, and trusted in that, and the details I had to work through, but that is really stuck, and I'm grateful for that. So in that sense, I mean, I think I'm grateful for that upbringing.
Yeah.
Music.
I learned the Bible.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
And we did a lot of memorization of candy and scripture. So I'm really motivated by candy. So I got a lot of scripture under my belt.
Yeah, that's amazing. The thing I remember, my mom had this there's a name for this. Is it mnemonics? Maybe my mom had this book that had funny characters that would help you memorize the books of the Bible. And one was eel feet shine. So it was an eel on ice skates. And so that's Ephesians. And then that was going into, he was doing a flip. So it was Philippians, there was all these bizarre stuff. I don't know why that.
Oh my gosh, we should do a Storymaker reboot of this.
I need to find that book. It's got to be somewhere.
There should be an animation. That's a new
totally. I'll find it. I'll get it to you. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, okay. So you grew up in Bible church. Love it. West Coast. And then, now you're a priest. How did that happen? Yeah.
So the music was, my parents were not particularly musical. I think my mom tried to get me to play violin when I was 4, and it was miserable. And I gave up really quickly. And then there was praise and worship, but they didn't listen to pop music. It was I didn't know where the Beatles were for a long time. It was very, it was not a musical education family. But two things happened. Number one, the Calvary Chapel church we went to, the pastor is the dad of the brothers from Switchfoot. So there was always, that was a musical aspect that was happening. Yeah. And then when I was in 6th grade, I went to see MXPX play a church around us. and it like blew my mind. And the next day I was like, me and my friends were like, we're starting a punk band. And so that was the beginning.
I love that era. I mean, Jake and I were in youth ministry as like super young people. And we had this youth ministry house. And every Friday we would host like bands traveling between Phoenix and San Diego. Yeah. So we were situated in Yuma, and Jake would like do these trades of like, come play with these kids, and I'll buy you dinner. And then going. So it's just, there was a whole scene.
I'm amazed that we never passed through that.
You may have been.
We definitely passed through that actual corridor, but that we never hung out with you guys then. Because we were, my bands were always based in San Diego. We would always drive to Phoenix, and it was miserable. So Yuma, we missed it.
We would get Mr. G's. It's so good. Best bean burritos, and like hook them up.
Amazing.
That was our trade.
Oh, I love that.
So, I love that. That's so great. Yeah, I think music is, one of the back doors to the heart. So, and Absolutely. We kind of like, we're like, kids love it. This is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we started a band, and then my mom also like sort of loved music. And she, at one point, she went to BU in Boston. And at one point she was like a manager for like a psychedelic rock band. So she loved music. And so she would take me and my friends to all these like Christian punk and hardcore shows growing up. And so every like Friday night we'd go out and go to some, punk show, and then hang out with the band afterwards at Denny's. And like, so music just became a bigger and bigger part of my life. To the point that like, eventually the bands that I started like got pretty good. And then I joined a band that was kind of starting. It was my sophomore year or junior year of high school. They were starting to kind of play outside of Southern California. And so my senior year, I actually ended up doing independent studies so that we could like start touring a little bit. And we did a little bit. But the day I graduated high school, we like left for 3 months. And then pretty much, that was 18, and until I was, 30, 34 or something like that. I basically was a touring musician. That band lasted for a few years. It was called Noise Ratchet. We actually just reformed after 20 years.
Oh my gosh!
We played Furnace Fest in Birmingham, Alabama. Last month.
You were down there, but I thought it was church business.
I did visit the Advent down in Birmingham, but we were there for emo rock. And so I did that, which was hilarious and wild to be playing these songs we haven't played in 20 years. But after that band broke up, before its glorious reformation last month, we started a band called Delta Spirit, and that was pretty much from like 2005, and it's still technically going, although we're sort of on indefinite hiatus. But we toured. That band toured full time until 2014.
I think that's where I met you.
Yeah.
At a show. And then also, Jake is he's a diehard super fan. You've got Jake, my husband, in your corner.
Amazing. He's a good guy to have in the corner. Yeah.
And then I have a 14-year-old, and he definitely has Delta Spirit merch that he wears.
Amazing. I love that. That's so great.
It's, as he grows, I don't know how long it's going to last, but but that's the whole thing with God, right? The stories are so flipped and upside down. You just can't even, I think like I have a teenager right now who's anxious about her future. And if you don't hit these certain marks, where are you going to land? And you just can't really predict all the things. Because God's imagination is too wild for that. So when I think we met at some of your shows, and then I remember you just talking to Jake about being in ministry. And I was like, what's this about?
So some of the background there, early on, I always took my faith very seriously. For whatever reason, I guess now I think the sense is that God had a call in my life, even at an early age. And I was wrestling and interpreting how that was. He has a call in all of our lives, but this was a call specifically eventually to ministry. And so early on, I had the sense like, wow, I would love to somehow serve in ministry, but I was raised in a church where like the sermons are extemporaneous and very long. And I knew that like, that wasn't my gift, like sort of mental remembering, or, sort of
45 minutes. I don't know.
Memorizing a 45-minute sermon and just riffing on things. I'm like, that's not really my gift. And so I don't know. As much as I'd love to do that, I don't think that's my gift. So God will have something else for me. And so for a long time, I mean, music was such a gift. And for me, always, the bands I was in were never actually explicitly Christian bands. But I felt that the music we were making was like beautiful and important. And I also just loved the opportunity that it gave me to just meet people and be present in strange, interesting situations that were like very not churchy, and sort of, in some real way, like, bring Christ into those situations. So I saw it almost as, I did see it as a ministry, not in a sort of like utilitarian sense, but just in the fact that I'm a Christian and want to actually be a Christian presence in places that aren't like, obviously Christian or churchy. So, and I just loved, music is just wonderful and a wild, it's one of these strange things that, there were 5 people in the band. So getting 5 people on the same page and making something that's sort of like not exactly tangible and offering it to people and sharing it with people and them, becoming a part of this music that you've worked on. And
I mean, it's a magical collaboration when you create other people. Like that's one of the things I love about story makers is like we have giftings in so many different areas and all these freelance artists, and then you're just like come together, and then somehow you're like, we have a series of books and things, all these things behind me, like, and I think that's kind of that amazing image bearing part of who we are and who God has made us to be. So we're alive in that, we're not sort of meant to have these like individual experiences outside of each other. And when the collaboration hits, it's like, wow, that's really magical.
Totally. Yeah. And it's, it's a good life lesson too, because it's not always magical, right? It's like can be miserable in the creative process. It can be miserable when you're touring. Like it's just so much of it is just like sludging through the day and sitting around waiting for something to happen. And then you get to sort of be a part of something that can be incredibly beautiful and transcendent. And so that's important in life, to recognize that it's not always
it's not all
glorious, right? But that all of that is gathered into this offering, right? This sort of like moment of sort of gift, right? So that's getting way ahead though. But
so I didn't realize this, that you were a Calvary kid too, but and maybe this is different from you, and we all both landed in the Anglican church.
I know. Wow.
And that's like an extreme opposite of where I grew up. But I just remember longing for something that was old and felt like it had a lot of soul to it, and that I could just like kind of enter into, whether I was feeling it or not, but feeling like whole. So that was, I went to a really high church, Anglican church in college. Like I just like the complete extreme.
Yeah.
And they even did this service in Latin.
Oh, wow.
Which is like really, and that's not like a normative.
No.
Like the Episcopal church at all. But somehow, well, in Arizona, I was like Tucson, Arizona. So probably there's a lot of, I don't know what that was about, but I got into it. That was my entry. Yeah. So what was and how did you get into the Anglican Communion?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so when I started playing music, I think the church I was at, it was always sort of praise and worship music, and which was like sort of rock and roll light, I guess, And so as I got better, as my bands got better, I started feeling like, oh geez, this band is just not good. And I really have I have a lot of space for a charismatic expression. I actually think it's like hugely beautiful and can be a really good thing. But I always did personally feel slightly like it felt to me in my own head as performative. And I was always worried about, what am I doing? What is someone else doing? And so the mixture of that sort of sense and not liking the music, I just would stop going to the worship part and I would come to church for the sermon, and the sermons were good. And so I was like, this is good. I'm learning a lot. But I knew enough to eventually say, like, part of the call of a Christian in the church is to sort of worship God with, like, gathered with Christians. And I'm not doing that. I'm just hearing someone talk about God, which is lovely and helpful, but I'm not actually worshiping God. And so I had zero, as you maybe did too, zero understanding of liturgy, zero understanding of sacraments or anything like that. That was all just, no one spoke about it. No one talked about it. And I never experienced it. I never went to like a friend's Methodist church or a Presbyterian church and got even a little bit. It was just,
I went to some Mormon churches as a kid.
That was probably the most liturgy you got, right?
I mean, I went with, my grandfather's Catholic. I went a couple times with him.
Right.
He kept me in the back because he's like, this is very embarrassing. You don't know what you're going to do. So don't like embarrass me. That's about it.
It's wild. Yeah. And so, I mean, eventually when I started touring more, number one, I was not in town. I was at different places on Sunday and I didn't know where to go. I was like, I like my pastor, but how do I find a random pastor at like in, Yuma, Arizona or something, And so, and thankfully it was before the iPhone, by God's grace. And so, it was either like you played Game Boy or you like read books. And so thankfully I ended up reading books, and that's when I sort of started a more, adult, practice of reading. And so I was, interested in God enough to want to read spirituality books or theology books. And so eventually I encountered this idea of liturgy, something that was sort of foreign to me. And so when I got back from tour once, I thought I should go to some church that will have a liturgy. And I looked up, for whatever reason, I ended up looking up this Benedictine monastery in San Diego that was near me. And so I went there and I went into the bookstore. The bookstore was open, and I went to the woman who was running it and said, like, I've never been to a liturgy. What do I do? I've been reading, theology. I've been reading a bit of the church fathers, but I have no idea what to do in the service. And she said, well, if they stand, if they kneel, and you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. But then she said this, she's like, but I just want to let you know, there's no going back. And I thought, what a crazy thing to say. But then I went to the service, and it was sort of like, not a really beautiful church. It was very modern and kind of weird. And the singing was terrible and the liturgy was a little whatever. But to me, it was like freedom. I like felt completely free. Like, this is what I've been looking for, this opportunity to worship God where everyone's sort of doing the same thing, using their bodies. And then it freed me to not think about myself, but to think about God. And so that was the beginning of me sort of coming into this. And then by God's grace, I met a really wonderful priest in the Episcopal Church, Father Doran Stambaugh, who's at St. Michael's in Carlsbad, California. He's the best. And he just sort of like befriended me and sort of mentored me. And I think a mixture of sort of God's call in my life and his influence is how, eventually I ended up here. So there's more to say about that, but we'll get to it later.
No, I mean, it's so, I'm always just so curious about that. And, the thing too, I think about like Gen Z and Alpha, these new generations coming up, they're so desperate for rhythms and they have an openness to that. And so, I think I grew up in a time where like hype church was, and it's still got a lot of space, within the breadth of the church. But because of anxiety and I think overstimulation, the liturgical rhythms have something deep to offer that can help us sort of like reframe ourselves and get our nervous systems in check and also extracting ourselves from ourselves. I think we just need such a break from ourselves, and the rhythm of the prayers and service just lends itself to that, which is really remarkable. And, and it's cool to also imagine like people across the world, we're all doing the same thing.
Exactly.
Praying the same thing. That's really so cool.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So Jonathan, I saw, so you were in SoCal and then you've been traveling everywhere. Then you were in Montreal, right?
We lived for a little while. We actually lived in New York for a bit. We lived in Williamsburg, and my son was born there. And then we moved back to LA, and then we moved most recently to Montreal and lived there for like a little under 4 years, which was a wild detour, but it was a beautiful, strange place to live. Yeah.
We have really good food there.
The food is amazing. And I mean, it's especially for a Southern Californian, it couldn't be more different. And that was sort of wonderful to feel like I was culturally fully out of place. And that's kind of a good thing to feel sometimes in life. But it's also very beautiful. The winter was sort of delightful for me, especially the first year. And then eventually realized, oh, wow, this thing goes for like 5-6 months sometimes.
Where's the sun?
Yeah. But we found a wonderful church there. And it was actually a helpful time for me because, as I moved into sort of Anglican Episcopal world, I sort of, like you, moved into a more high church expression, which I actually think is where my heart is. But when we moved there, the neighborhood church was a very low church evangelical Anglican church with like praise and worship band that wasn't very good. And I think it was important for me to like revisit that in some ways, like to sort of re-engage and see how beautiful that can be and how God can use that, and the sort of strengths of evangelical Christianity, which is like a real emphasis on spiritual formation, like taking your faith seriously, an emphasis on community and sort of care for the community around you too. And so God used it to help me become not convinced that
it's easy
I'm better than I used to be, or I'm better than those people. And instead I realized, there's gifts from this as well. So.
Oh, totally. It's like our natural place to kind of like be,
be cool.
Like, we like to organize what's good and what's better. Yeah. And, I think I just was reading this book called The Storytelling Animal, and he talks about how we always sort of see ourselves as heroes when we look back at our memories, when we're revisiting those memories, and how we like romanticize them, or how we're the main player. But I think when you can have this sort of balance of like, oh, that was all right, but then now I have this new perspective about the thing. It's, a little tiny redemptive moment. God just uses everything. Like He is waste not.
Absolutely.
It's like, I will take all those leftovers and make something spectacular. Yeah. That's what He does with our lives, over and over again. Thank God. Jonathan, you have a couple kids, and you're a priest down in the South.
Yeah.
And when I was down there last year, it was so fun to see how you take your spirit of evangelism, creativity, and this love for liturgy, and sort of blend those things together to invite more people to the party. Yeah. And so as you kind of look at your life and the creativity God's given you, do you see it that way, or how's that play out for you?
Yeah. I mean, I do. And one of the things that the band did right before things slowed down was we actually did a music festival. So I got a little bit of this opportunity to sort of learn how to sort of envision an event and execute an event, which I ended up finding really like enjoyable. And so the mixture of like knowing how beautiful and meaningful and important music and art is to just everybody, and then also like sort of the joy of like coming together and as a community and events, I think I brought into sort of my ministry here, which we're at it's a very traditional church. The worship is, everyone thinks like, oh, you're a rock band and you're a priest, so you must do sort of like rock worship. And it's like not that at all. It is like, it is medieval. We use the old prayer book. It's very traditional. And I love that. I have that's exactly where I want it to be. I have no interest in sort of like making the church more rock and roll or something. But so that and thankfully I think, the church here understands that about me. They know that like my heart is not to change the ethos of the church. But also we are downtown in Savannah, and we're surrounded by an art school, and there's tons of people walking around the church all the time. And so what the temptation of traditional churches is to sort of see ourselves as sort of the club of people who have it all right. And, maybe someone will accidentally wander in, but instead, my vision and the church is incredibly supportive of it. And it is to like find sort of new points of entry so that people can come to know us, and to then not just like to throw cool events that are fun parties for people, but to have things that sort of are edifying to our community here, that sort of offer something beautiful to the wider community, and that show people, or, offer people ways to come deeper into know and love the Lord, and to worship God, and to become a member of this community of faith here at this time in this place. And so it's been fun. And so we've done things like, outdoor art exhibits, or like we do a concert series of free outdoor concerts in the summer. And they're not like praise and worship concerts. They're just like random bands that happen to be touring through, or who I know. And there's no evangelistic aspect to it, other than just wanting to offer the community something beautiful and good, and a chance to just gather and let them know we're here for that. And then we do, like you had, like lecture series, because the other thing that I sort of picked up at the last church we were at is just offering people a way to dig deeper into their faith and think about, what does their faith have to do with this contemporary moment? How do we live faithfully as Christians right here, right now, the place that God's put us? And so that's sort of I'm always trying to find people that can speak to that. And you were one of those people, and Dave Zoll was one of those people. And we just had a great guy down this last weekend from New York, Stephen Adubato, who has a platform called Cracks and Pomo, which, also speaks to our place as Christians in society. So it's really fun to sort of gather people to edify us, and to offer something else. And so, yeah, it's really fun.
I think that's amazing. I think, having the freedom to have curiosity about people, and then trusting that the stories will do what God's story is going to do, God's story. Yep. I think that's I think ties into the charismatic movement of having a high view of the Holy Spirit, and knowing like the Holy Spirit is going to make some moves. And we just get to use our skill set and our creativity and connection to make that invitation to them. So it's like, we get to invite you to this thing that has given me so much life. That's so different than, sort of this fear-based approach around you really need to be in here for, X, Y, Z reasons. Like, well, actually, like, I have so much life, and I want you to have that life. And integration. I mean, I think we're also desperate to have integrated lives.
Yes.
And the faith and art aspect of those things, I think, has, that integrated flex in a way that's really exciting and meaningful for humans.
And trusting, I mean, in some sense, it's trusting that, like, God is beautiful, and that people need and want to know God, like whether they recognize it or not, right? Like, there's this wonderful letter from Evelyn Underhill to like the bishops at Lambeth in the 30s, and it's called "God is the Interesting Thing About Religion." And so the argument is like all of you think you're doing all these great programs, but you're not interesting. God is still the interesting thing. And like,
that's
trusting
amazing.
that's true. Like, even now, like, it's not like God was more interesting before and now we have to make him more interesting. Or like, God is what people want. And so it's just finding ways of sort of like turning their hearts to be open to the fact that God is actually what they want, and then trusting that that's true, right? Instead of thinking that we have to make God more interesting. Like the creative parts aren't like about
it's like you don't really need to market the creator. And that's sort of that desperate space people end up in. But thankfully, God uses these things sometimes from time to time, thankfully. Jonathan, before we roll out, I guess, normally I always ask, like, what story has captured your imagination? So yes, we'd love that. And then maybe you have some music things that we should be listening to. I don't know. Whatever, you think is exciting for us to consider.
That's good.
It's not exciting, but whatever you love.
There's a few things I was thinking of. I mean, I'm going to give you like a whole list. Like at some point when I was young, I this is like the kind of highbrow thing, and I'll give you lowbrow things. But somehow, I mean, I remember reading like Tolstoy's Death of Ivan Ilyich when I was in 6th grade, and somehow I know,
like a 12-year-old in San Diego.
The problem is I don't know who any of the characters were because all their names are some crazy Russian name, but something about that book like took God really seriously and took like people's lives in relation to God really seriously. And that we reread it. We have like a faith and fiction group down here, and we reread it, and I didn't think it was actually as good then, but like whatever it was in my life at that point, it like turned my heart to the seriousness of God. So that's one thing. And then I also think like I was born in '84, and I just feel like the movies that came out when I was around that age, like Hook, Sandlot, like what else? Like the earlier Secret Garden, like all these movies were sort of mystical in a way that sort of like pointed to the fact that there's something else going on in the world, that it's not just purely materialism, and that helped me, I think, look for God. Strangely enough, so go watch Sandlot and
Sandlot's so good. Well, and also it's just like so they're all like very community, and then like kids are just like, they're kind of like magical, and that's why I love Roald Dahl so much, the way he writes kid characters, that they're so clever. And they're seeing the world, like they're seeing the magic of the world that exists but grown-ups can't see anymore. I love that.
It's so good.
That's awesome.
And then music, let me think. I think, I mean, this is not new, I'm sure everybody, but man, I still just love him so much. I've just been such a Nick Cave fan for a while, and just his Red Hand Files are just incredible, and his book,
so good.
Faith, Hope, and Carnage, is so
powerful. Check out the blog.
And he has this album of like spoken word psalms that he's written, and just those are just powerfully beautiful poems to God. And so I just think, man, dig into Nick Cave. And then I just also love, I love the band Big Thief and Adrian. I always don't know if I'm going to say her name right, but Adrian Lenker. And I just think she's the most amazing songwriter of our age. So I just love that music. And she's sort of, I think, the Bob Dylan of our age.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. There's like a real like hunger for God in it. I'm not sure it's like any of it. It's all like kind of weird, bizarro lyrics, but somehow I really, it's helpful to me. And I think it's just good music. So,
we always like to talk about Madeleine L'Engle, and she talks about, all good art is Christian art, because it identifies the chaos in the world, but points you somehow to the cosmos.
Absolutely.
She would say like bad art was art that just left you in chaos, and no hope or no spark of anything. But that's what that sounds like to me. So
I agree. I agree. Absolutely.
Well, Jonathan, we're so excited for your ministry, and I just love getting to talk to folks about the upside downness of God's nature.
Yeah, he surprises us. I mean, I never thought I'd be a priest. So it's weird.
Well, and it's so good for parents. So many parents listen in, and you all, as you're raising kids, and I think so much. I was just meeting with some dads in Texas, and they were talking about the fear around like shame, that feeling of shame if they're not like teaching their kids right, and the faith right. And I think we would just love to absolve you of that, and that you can trust the stories, and that they're upside down, and they're long stories, and God is pursuing all of our kids fervently, just like he pursued each and every one of us. So
I'm so grateful for your ministry. You're a blessing to our church and to the kids who use Storymakers materials here. And I mean, I think when we're talking about story, the story is always the story of redemption, of God doing something for us that we can't do for ourselves. And you're grounded in that, and that's the story that's gonna, that changes people's hearts. And so thank God for that.
Thanks for listening. Today's episode of the Storymakers podcast was made possible by the Storymakers team and our generous community of donors. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review the Storymakers podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Share the show with a friend or two, and use the code SMPodcast10 for 10% off your next adventure. Remember, be free and have fun.